I am live right now. With me today, he is a U.S. Senate candidate out of New Hampshire, running as a Republican. He is Bruce Fenton. Bruce, are you ready to roar?
I'm ready to roar.
All right, now, Bruce, as we were talking about before the show, I got a little distracted by your incredible comic book collection and all the merchandise you had back there. Just finished an interview with Eric July about the Rippaverse. We could probably do a couple hours on comic book fandom, but it's not exactly what we're here to talk about today, but we'll see if we can work it in somewhere. So maybe you can give me a little bit of background into yourself. I know you've been heavily involved in cryptocurrency up in New Hampshire as well. So maybe just give us a little bit of your background and then kind of segue into just why you are running for Senate right now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a dad and a husband, and I own a farm here in New Hampshire, and I've been in the investment business for about 30 years, and I've been in crypto for about 9, mostly Bitcoin. And I'm somebody who cares a lot about freedom and human rights and liberty and the Constitution. And so I figured that somebody's got to do something. Why not me?
And how did you get your start into the whole libertarian world, into politics? When did you first take interest in all that?
Yeah, I've been interested in politics since I was in high school. I volunteered. I was kind of a conventional Republican as a high school kid. I volunteered on campaigns and things like that. And then later on in life, I became much more libertarian and independent. I supported some independent candidates. I was even against the Republicans at some point, especially about the war, George W. Bush, the Iraq War. But mostly liberty. It was really probably 2008 that my modern kind of beliefs really were formed when I started becoming a bigger fan of Ron Paul. With the Tea Party movement and Ron Paul and that kind of thing really got me to thinking about liberty. And that's when I started coming to New Hampshire and Pork Fest and things like that. Actually it's probably a little bit before that, but around that time period, that really, Ron Paul especially, really shaped my views. And that kind of tied into crypto too. There was an overlapping community. It was the Free Staters that taught me about Bitcoin. That was the first time I heard about Bitcoin, was at Pork Fest in, I think, 2012 or something like that. So, there's a lot of overlap.
It's certainly a familiar story to be at least partially inspired by Ron Paul. It's certainly the story of this podcast. I'm curious how much of Ron Paul's political path and the way he went about things in the political sense inspired your particular political path here.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that how he voted, always voting no, pretty much, that inspires me. The fact that I think he's made a difference. He's certainly furthered liberty. Those kind of things inspire me. But to be honest, like the whole political process is kind of in need of a lot of improvement. Let's put it that way. I don't want to be too negative, but the whole process.
People call me black-pilled all the time, so you can be as negative as you need to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a broken process, the whole thing. So it's hard to sort of model anybody because every race is different, every politician is different. But the core principles of staying true to the Constitution and liberty and human freedom, that's what really matters, and we need a lot more of that.
Were you ever involved in politics at all, whether in the Republican Party, the Libertarian Party, before this, or are you starting fresh here?
I've never even run for dog catcher before, and here I am running for United States Senate. So my first foray into politics.
So I don't want to take a guess here, but was there something about the events of the last 2 years that played into why it is this moment in time that you have become inspired to become involved with politics?
100%. And that's probably one of the most common questions. And that's how I always answer it. It's why I decided is because of where our world is now. Okay. We're in a fourth turning, an epic shift. There's a book called The Fourth Turning by Strauss, and how it talks about how every 100 years, the world changes, everything changes, borders, systems, who we trust, money, everything changes. And this happens. And it's clearly happening right now. We're in a fourth turning. We're in a time of epic change and epic shifting. And we're going to go one way or another. We're going to go a path towards tyranny or a path towards freedom. And the last couple of years really, really concern me because it's a path towards tyranny, the kind of tyranny that we just can't have. I can't allow it on my watch. If there's anything I can do about it, I've got to fight it, because otherwise we're going to have a generation of boots on heads and our kids wearing masks and political signals and having movement passes for a generation. And that's just not acceptable. And it's not America. So yeah, the last couple of years are a big effect. I wouldn't be running if we didn't have this tyranny of the last couple of years.
How much of the COVID regime and the COVID tyranny, how much of that impacted you directly? Whether it was anything that might have impacted just your physical presence there on the ground. I assume it's less than it impacted me at the time I was living in Los Angeles, no longer am. But I'm just curious, how much were you personally affected by it, as opposed to maybe just what you're viewing from afar and kind of pointing out the tyranny of?
Yeah, I've never answered a question about uh, whether I've taken a vax. The answer is no, but I've never submitted to any vax pass. I've never submitted to a movement pass. I've only worn a mask about 10 times, typically flights and a couple doctor's office. My kids were forced to wear a mask, and I took that personally. I took it personally. I went into the school board meetings 8 times. I got removed by police 5 times
Really?
because I
Not
feel
arrested, just removed.
yeah, well, I'm a registered investment advisor, and I do have a big mouth, and I cause a lot of trouble, but I also care about my licenses, and I do care about the law. So I'm careful. I called the police first. I called the attorney general. I make sure exactly when you get arrested and stuff like that, and what the policy was. But the reason that I was protesting that is because I believe there was a political signal. The masks were mandated by a school board that weren't wearing masks themselves. So they weren't really doing it because of health. They're doing it because of a signal that says, look at me, I'm with the Pelosi Church of Woke. And that's fine. People can be whatever church they want, and they can do whatever stupid beliefs they want. And I support that. And I defend that right. Ironically, right before the lockdown, I was defending the right of people to cover their faces, because in England, they were going to ban face coverings because they want the surveillance cameras. And there's some people that wear face coverings. And so I
Little did you know, you wouldn't have to make that argument for long.
I defend somebody's right to wear a headscarf or a face covering or a political signal or a mask or whatever they want. I defend that right. But yeah, absolutely don't have that right to tell my kids to wear that political signal any more than anybody has the right to tell them to wear a Bruce Fenton shirt or a MAGA hat.
I think one thing that you mentioned there, having kids, and I think that it's something that a lot of people has caused a lot of people to maybe look at things differently in the last couple of years. It's almost even one thing if they're trying to force an adult to take a jab, which would also be terrible and horrible. And it's also just one thing if they're pushing sexuality or drag shows on adults. I would still be kind of like, weirded out by all that. But I think in the last couple of years, I don't know if it's new or if it's just come to light more and people are noticing it more, how much of this stuff is targeted at children, whether it's sexuality, whether it is simply pushing kids to be shot with an unknown substance. Essentially, is that part, and you as someone having kids, is that kind of an extra driver for you, seeing like, all right, this is too far?
Yeah, and I like what you said. I broaden it a little bit more, to this kind of, I'd say it jokingly, Church of Woke, but it's really is a very serious thing, because this movement is acting like a church, and it's acting like a new religion, and not a good one. There's religions that have killed millions of people. There's some bad religions. This is acting like a bad religion. It's got high priests and heretics and dogma and everything else.
And it's a lab coat instead of lab coat's the new robe.
Yes, exactly. Scientists, and so and racist is, and everybody's a racist. There's a lot of things going on in this, but ultimately it's an exporting of centralized, identity politic driven communist style thinking, and it's a broken, bad ideology. So it's pushed by, so you see these crazy things, like there's one website they tracked 70, you mentioned the drag shows, is 70 incidences. This isn't just 2 or 3 things. They had at least 70 documented cases of drag shows doing performances, for drag queens doing performances for kids. And you have these diversity and other initiatives, which are disguised as diversity, but they're really highly partisan political movements that are trying to make people's identity based on race or skin color or religion or other factors. And they're trying to do a lot of other things, redefine words, decrease the value of the family, fundamental things that are broken, like not even being able to define the word woman when we have a Supreme Court justice who couldn't define the word woman. I mean, that's absurd. That's going down a very bad path. If we don't know what basic words mean, then that means that a mob can just decide what the words mean, and they can very easily use that to justify tyranny, which they already do. They already do with words like terrorism and racist and other things like that. When canceling. So it's bigger. It's bigger than we realize, bigger than a lot of people realize. It's more than just what they're doing to the kids. It's an overall ideology, and that's an ideology of China. It's an ideology that leads to central control and boots on heads and CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, locking our money down. Very, very serious stuff. It's very grave times. And this is something that I'm trying to get across in the campaign trail. This isn't normal times. This is different and very serious times that we need people who understand and care about these things.
Towards what you said there, in terms of kind of your motivation behind all this, and seeing how it is sort of what we're seeing now. It's not even an attack against anything specific. It is, if you look at it, compartmentalized. You look at mass mandates or jabs or CRT or whatever it may be. When you look at it in an overall way, it almost seems like it's an attack on just meaning. On anything meaning anything. It seems like it's a full-on nihilistic assault.
Right. They want the movement wants people to worship the state and the state's agents, which are now scientists, and basically this weird kind of vague ideology. The Bible calls it powers and principalities, sort of this just vague evil. And it's a real thing, whether you're religious or not, believe in the Bible or not. It's a real thing throughout human history. There's been times that are just evil, crappy, horrible times. And you can't quite point. Sometimes you can point and say, oh, yes, it was Stalin. You can point to an individual. It takes more than an individual, though. It's a system and a state. You need the state apparatus. And it's happened many, 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 many times in history where we've just had times where things are just bad. And it's driven, by this just kind of evil ideology. And I think that's clear now. They're trying to change what things mean and the very fundamentals of how our world works. When is it okay to use force? The things that you're taught so hopefully, or I was taught when I was 5 years old, don't hit anybody unless they hit you. Well, that's out the window now. Now it's like, well,
now it's violence if you
if they say something that hurts your feelings.
A man can't give birth, right?
Right. Yeah. If they say something, if they say a man can't give birth, you can bat them over the head and crack their head on the streets of San Francisco and they die in a pool of blood. And that's absurd. That's not humanity. These aren't workable systems. When I was a little kid, I learned how the government worked, and there was nothing in there that said, you get a scientist in charge. I mean, we know a decent amount about disease and infectious disease and the spread of disease. Nowhere in any document of anything was, for one thing, in the United States, we didn't even have lockdowns considered. We had all these scenarios with the CDC. They're supposed to be there protecting. They're ready in case there's a big thing, and this is finally the big thing. Well, they had all these scenarios. Nowhere in there was anything saying to lock down the country, even for something much worse that was proven to be much worse. So it's just fundamentally flawed kind of things that are going on in the world. We should be quite concerned about and really work hard to fix it. We can fix it. It's pretty simple. We just go back to the basics, like the Constitution.
How do you view your campaign in terms of waging this battle? Are you running a campaign to bring attention to issues, or do you really see a chance for yourself to take this nomination for the Republican Party in New Hampshire and really be competitive for this Senate seat? How real is this to you in that sense?
Oh, it's super real. I've got a great chance. There's 4 other major primary opponents, and I've raised more money than all of them combined. I got more social media than all of them combined. I got more potential new donors than all of them combined. And I've been in the race less than almost all of them. I've only been doing this a couple months. And on the debate, my comments on the debate got 500,000 views, and the original debate only got a couple thousand views. So people like the message. I'm working hard on the road, got a campaign van. I'm going everywhere. I started at 6 a.m. today. I came back. I'm doing a couple interviews. I'm going out as soon as this interview's done, going over to Nashua to speak at a meeting there. So I've been getting the message out. Very, very winnable, absolutely winnable. I can win the primary. And if I win the primary, the general is very, very winnable. My opponent in the general election is, she's had polls in the 30%. And she's an unpopular Democrat, single term. She only won by 1,000 votes last time, and there was another candidate who had 17,000 votes. He endorsed me day one. So if we had exactly the same numbers as last time, I'd win by 16,000 votes. And she knows these numbers, so she's afraid. That's why she's targeting me more than my opponents. So absolutely, I can win the primary. That's the biggest step, and maybe even the hardest step. And then if you win the primary, you get a lot of national support as well. And I have a lot of other support that that any candidate would get. But I can bring in the most libertarians and independents and free staters because that's what I am. So I can definitely win, and then I'd be the next senator from New Hampshire.
How much has I'm phrasing this as a question, but it's really not. How much has your decision to run as a Republican as opposed to, say, in a third party like the Libertarian Party, how was that basically because you want to win and that's where you could win, whereas it's just not possible in the third party?
Yeah, I'm a libertarian. I love the Libertarian candidate. He's a good friend of mine. I love all the
he was actually my guest last week, so I'm not trying to cause. I know you guys are friends, so I'm not trying to cause.
They're all good folks. I mean, we're all like the same community. It was just we all kind of laughed when we, some didn't realize I was going to run and stuff. It's all good. We're all friends. I mean, we all go to cookouts to each other. The Free State is a pretty tight knit community, and we support liberty. We support liberty above all else. So, I love the libertarians. I consider myself one of them. I still retweet the libertarian stuff, and they invite me to their events and things like that. I did do it as a Republican because, there's a growing liberty movement in the Republican Party at a federal level with people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey, and all the way down at the local level and the state level. And here in New Hampshire, we have at least 80, on some issues more like 150, but we have at least 80 really solid liberty representatives in our state house. So there's a growing liberty Republican movement that I'd like to help. I think that's one of the best hopes for the country. The libertarians just don't hold many positions, but the liberty Republicans do. And if we had more Republicans who are like Rand Paul and Ron Paul, maybe that could be the face of the new party. That would be a wonderful thing.
And when you mentioned earlier that race was only won by 1,000 seats last year. Again, not trying to cause controversy here, but it does make me wonder. I mean, if you do get that Republican nomination, and we're talking about a race that could be within 500, 1,000, 2,000 votes or something like that, have you talked to Jeremy about what if this actually looks close and he's actually got a little bit of support? And I mean, has there been any kind of behind the scenes about how that might look? Because I know he did mention last week when I talked to him that he would never do anything to stop you from winning, which kind of implies that he might do something if that scenario came up. But
I think we all love liberty. I'll just leave it at that. We love liberty and we stick together.
All right. I think that's fair. I think that's kind of what one of our commenters just sort of asked there too. How much of a threat is Jeremy Kauffman's campaign for the Senate position? I mean, we know Jeremy himself will admit he's not competitive in terms of being able to win the seat. And again, that's why you're choosing that Republican Party vehicle. So let's talk a little bit more about how you see this, if you can get past this primary, how you really see this playing out. And I'm really curious how you've been accepted or not, or what has your reception been amongst whatever might make up the sort of the establishment Republicans of the New Hampshire Party? Have you been welcomed in as, somebody that fits in really well, whose libertarian values can jive with this? Or have there been those that maybe look at you with skepticism saying, I'm sure there's a guy or two that thinks that's their nomination because they've been in this spot for 20 years or something like that. So what's it been like for you?
Yeah, it's a little of both. I get an overall very good response when I go to these town committee meetings and, meeting people. People like the message. I talk, about what I believe. And I talk from the heart without notes and without consultants, and it resonates. People like what I say. They like, how I say it, and they agree with how I would vote. So I do get a lot of supporters from that. And I win over some of the establishment folks, and some of the interesting thing is being me being the strongest in the general is actually a drawback in the primary, because this is a Republican primary. It's 100% Republicans, red hat wearing, diehard Republicans. I'm really a libertarian out here.
Does New Hampshire have a closed primary or an open primary?
It's open.
Okay.
So you get a lot of, I do get for example, every third meeting or so, somebody doesn't like my position on drugs. I believe in decriminalizing drugs. I don't want any laws at all about the drugs, honestly. And I'd certainly start with decriminalizing marijuana or something. A lot of people think that's crazy, because remember, we have like sheriffs and other people who are in the party who are running for office as well. And they're running on get rid of drugs kind of thing. So I think some of them probably think my ideas are a little out there. But the important thing is like what we said at the very beginning of the podcast, which is we're in these extraordinary times. And I try and emphasize this to everybody, even Democrats, even socialists. I say, look, we're in these extraordinary times of change, and we've got to get this right. And that's something that can resonate, because there's even people on the opposite side, very far left Democrats who they're looking at the world saying this isn't quite right. That the government's saying what is true, and aiding in censorship of social media, a scientist who can shut down the world. These aren't workable systems. They're not good systems. So talking about those things, I think, resonates with a lot of people, no matter what they are. But ironically, in the primary, you got to really go right, because you've got to get those primary voters. Only 150,000 people vote in the primary. Wow. So, they're the diehard Republicans.
So how do you go about kind of messaging to maybe more standard Republicans who might agree with you on a lot and that you might be able to make some headway with, but then maybe they get to that one of these issues like drugs or whatever it may be, where they're like, oh, I don't know if I like everything else you're saying, but that kind of makes me feel a little queasy.
I try and convince them that I'm right. I talk about Portugal in the case of drugs. I talk about, the vast costs. I say, okay, I get you don't like weed, but
have you tried some?
Yeah, have you tried it?
Because that might change your view. But.
Right, exactly. That might be a good. You know what? That might be a good technique. Actually, maybe I'll bring a bong to these Republican town committee meetings. Might get some press.
It would definitely get some press. Have you tried it yet? It could just be one of your campaigns.
I shouldn't reveal this because I might want to use it as a trick later. But I was gonna have a fake joint in my pocket one time in the debate in case a drug question came up. I didn't want to do a real drug because I didn't want to get arrested walking off the stage. Sure, but I thought it'd be funny. It'd be the same kind of, if they asked like, what do you think about drugs? I was going to pull it out, and I was going to do that one time. But yeah, I think educating people, trying to convince them why I'm right. And then if they just totally disagree, then I say, hey, look, you may disagree, but I'm more electable than the other people. The number one goal you want to win, and you may disagree with me, but everybody agrees I'm better than Hassan, the Democrat who's in charge now. So, I think I win some people over. It's a pretty friendly process generally. It's a lot of volunteers and stuff. So I don't get a lot of negative feedback. Even those who disagree, they agree with me on 80% or 90%, and they really like what I talk about, the medical tyranny. And I mean, I say a lot of things, and I don't edit my comments much, and I have a lot of opinions. And so nobody's going to like everything I say. You're just not like the very few people would like everything. There's always going to be something you disagree with, but I think most people agree with most things that I say.
You mentioned, now obviously a big part of your campaign is running against this COVID tyranny, against vaccine mandates and this sort of thing. But I'm kind of curious your view on, maybe from like the sense of your libertarian philosophy, how you jive with how some states have actually fought back against this. So like for example, DeSantis in Florida passing a law against companies allowing vaccine mandates. Now, from the pure libertarian sense, if we hadn't seen anything else happening around us, you would say, of course, a business should be allowed to do what they want. But in the context of these extraordinary times, as you mentioned, I'm curious how you see actions like that, if you would support actions like that at any kind of government level, or does that kind of, does that rub against your libertarian philosophy too much?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really is. And it's nuanced and not super easy to answer. I've thought a lot about that, because you're absolutely right. It is against libertarian principles to tell a business what to do, but it is also one of the very few, there's only a few things that is legitimate for government: protecting life, liberty, property, and maybe enforcement of contracts. And there is a very weird, because we're in this fourth turning and things are so strange. It is probably a time for government to protect the citizens from this kind of tyranny and this kind of, robbing of liberty. When you say people can't work or can't use their money, social media is another one. I'm in favor of privately owned social media companies, or any other company, being able to allow whoever they want, whenever they want, and boot people for whatever reason. And I'm not in favor, especially at a federal level, of legislation, kind of mandating that they let people stay on. But we have a lot of problems with this when we have like the CDC telling social media these accounts are misinformation, and then they get banned, this kind of cooperation. So, you can't, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, Facebook's private, they can do what they want. Well, yeah, but when you have the federal government bring them into hearings and talking to them and telling them what's true and what's not true, and they have a line between, they have a whole office at the CDC that just talks to a whole office at Facebook. I can't get a hold of a person at Facebook or Twitter. You can't. I mean, I think, I know famous people who have 1 million followers who can't get anybody. They can't even get verified. They can't get anybody on the phone at Twitter.
It's crazy how a company that big, like, literally doesn't have customer service.
Yeah, no customer service. But if
except for that customer, except for
if
the
you're
customer
in the woke mob and you work for Biden or Pelosi or something, boy, you can get people banned. And they do this. They admitted it at a White House press conference. The CDC called them up and said, we don't like these accounts. Boom, they're gone. That's not right. So you have such an overbearing tyranny over the last couple of years that, I think that, and DeSantis I like a lot. And I mean, he must know the bill a lot better than I do. So, I could definitely, although it's against my normal liberty principles, I would know, but it is a role. And here's another interesting thing that's related to that. When you talk about, ideally the libertarian principle is to eliminate everything at the federal level and push it down to the state. And then you push from the state down to the towns, and then from the towns to the individual. Sure. And I agree with that. And I want to, vote basically no on everything at the federal level and push it down. The one of the few exceptions is it is the duty of the higher roles of government to protect you from the lower rungs of government. So the federal government should protect you from your state doing stupid nonsense like making you wear masks. And your state should protect you from your stupid school board or your local yokel trying to tell you, because it's hard to fight. I tried to fight the school board. It's very difficult. It's hard to get them fired. It's like, it takes a lot of resources. You can't gather a grassroots movement. I'm not going to get 300 people to show up to the school board because, there's only so many parents in the town. You know what I mean? So it's an enormous amount of fighting that you have to do to get your rights back when they're taken. So I would be in favor of something like say a state law that says school, when we tried to pass this just recently, we did pass it, but it got vetoed, a state law that says the schools can't make your kids wear a mask, or a federal law that says the state can't allow these kind of things. So those are the legitimate uses of government to protect people's liberty, but that's it.
I mean, it's kind of the great libertarian dilemma. I mean, almost at any level. I mean, there are libertarians who would say even you going to the school board meeting makes you a sadist because the school shouldn't exist. So why are we even dealing with this? But I think it just speaks to a reality that no matter what we're looking at, like you're probably not turning all your neighbors libertarian tomorrow. So therefore, we have to kind of look at the institutions that are in place, look at how they're violating rights, and sometimes support something that might not be purely libertarian, but it's not like we're choosing between the not quite purely libertarian and the purely libertarian. We're choosing between the not quite purely libertarian and the pure tyranny.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We've got to fight this tyranny because it's so bad and so pervasive, and you can't be too much of a libertarian purist. I talked to a libertarian at a meeting one time, and somehow I mentioned D-Day or Saving Private Ryan or something like that. I said something about them being brave. I think it was the D-Day anniversary or something. I said something about those brave men who went to the on the shore, facing those machine guns to fight Nazis. And he looked at me, he says, bunch of statists.
And wasn't being sarcastic?
Yeah, no, he's one of there's a lot of characters, those people in the liberty movement, you have a lot in your audience who know this. There's a lot of characters.
And a lot of audience who probably are this, but whatever.
Yeah, I just went up to, that person might be on the thing. I went up to Porkfest a week ago. There's folks like that. They're so anti-government that even the guys that were fighting, they're like, nope, statist. He was wearing a uniform. He's a statist, So there's definitely different degrees of it, but you don't want to be too purist that you lose the forest for the trees, because if we didn't fight the Nazis, then we end up with even more tyranny. I mean, you gotta think about like, you got your principles, and I mean, perfect libertarian principles would be like, okay, no government, whatever, or very minimal government. We're not going to get involved, non-intervention. Okay, but then what? What if the Nazis won? And it's like that. I think it's an Amazon Prime movie where it's like this alternate future where they've won.
Yeah. And in the High Castle. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want that. That. So you've got to stop the tyranny when you can and where you can. And I hate to say compromise because I don't like to compromise on things, but if you've got to be true to liberty above all else. If you don't compromise on liberty, then some of these things probably would make sense, because you're protecting other people's rights.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is something that a lot of people, I think myself included, have discovered in the last couple of years. You can have theoretical liberty all you want. No one's going to stop you from being right or for having the right philosophy. The challenge is getting it in your own life and dealing with what life and what governments at various levels, or nowadays even corporations, throw at you to undermine your liberty. And I think if you want to be purely correct, you're basically going to have both your hands behind your back in that fight.
Yep.
But
Exactly.
you'll be right. So whatever.
Yeah. Ye-
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. No, you're exactly right.
One now, like I said, I know a big part of your motivation was the COVID tyranny of the last couple of years, and it's certainly been a lot of my motivation with like everything I talk about nowadays. And it's certainly affected my personal life a lot, which I've talked about a lot on the show. But one thing I've been trying to talk about a lot more, which I'm less of an expert in, but I'm aware of the looming threat of it. And it's something you mentioned earlier on in this interview. That is the CBDC. So I've discussed it on the show a few times with various guests. But for anybody who might be tuning in who's not familiar with it or why it is such a threat, can you kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, sure. So a CBDC is a central bank digital currency. And what it is the government coming and saying, hey, look, here's this fancy digital money that you can put on your phone. And it's real money. You don't need PayPal. It's real dollars. They're right here and they're right from the Fed. So you can trust them. And it's kind of digital, almost like a cryptocurrency. So that's the pitch. The drawback,
Sounds great, right?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah. The drawback is, of course, that gives them control. And what we saw Trudeau do with the truckers is he shut them down by shutting off their PayPal and their Visa and their ability to get donations. What a central bank digital currency would do is shut off the money itself. You could have dollars and then your dollars do not work anymore. They're not dollars anymore. They're fizzled, burned nonsense. They can literally break your money. And just by you specifically. And since it's digital, they can target it to you as a person. So in a digital world, control over whether money is real or not, or control over someone's wealth at a federal government level is totally unacceptable, because that leads to total tyranny. It's game over. It's the one thing we cannot risk, because if they have this power, it is T minus X until it becomes total tyranny. All it takes is a few things. They'll blame an emergency or a terrorist attack, and they'll expand it, and they'll say, well, now we're going to only freeze the accounts of terrorists. And then one little bit later, some other tyrant will come in and change the definition of terrorist. And before you know it, we'll have President Kamala, or, the massive surveillance state that she will be in control of. And they'll just decide that they're going to shut off, just like they shut people off social media for hate speech or whatever. And they'll shut off people's money. And then it's game over. We couldn't have this conversation because you wouldn't be able to buy internet, and I wouldn't be able to either. And we wouldn't have email, and I wouldn't be able to drive anywhere. Without money, even the most rugged preppers I know, without money, it's pretty hard. You can use alternate forms of money, but it's a power we absolutely cannot allow them to have. CBDCs are a big, big danger. I'm one of the few people talking about this that I know of.
And the scary thing about the CBDC, as opposed to even now, like, yeah, I guess that for any reason, the government could probably tell a bank to freeze your bank account or something like that. But when that happens, well, you froze your bank account. That sucks, but you can go earn more money. But the CBDC, they can actually lock you out of money, of the concept of money.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so how do you go about, in terms of your Senate campaign in particular, or say if you were actually to become the senator from one of the senators from New Hampshire, what can actually be done about this? Is it more just something where we need to just, at least first now, since so many people really understand the threat of it, use that bully pulpit to spread the message about it? But I'm curious what you would support, maybe legislatively. Would you support like an outright ban on the CBDC, for example?
Yeah. I would definitely support a ban on the federal government issuing a central bank digital currency, or any currency that is digitally controlled and could in any way ever be shut down. And the only way I know how to do that is through some kind of open source code that can't be changed. And we already have one. It's called Bitcoin. It works pretty darn well. So we don't really need to invent new money. The Fed doesn't need to be in the money business at all anyway. Government doesn't. But if they are, and to the extent that they are, and I don't believe as a solo senator I have the power to get the government out of the money business or adopt the Bitcoin standard. But we don't know that. These are crazy times. Like I say, we don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. In 2 years, I could end up being the Winston Churchill of the, of the Senate, because, he was warning about the Nazis before anybody. They all thought he was crazy, and then a couple of years later he became the most popular. That could absolutely happen. I could be talking about this tyranny and stuff, and I could be, a lone oddball like some of the others. There's not lone, but a handful of other senators who do this kind of thing, like Rand Paul. Um, but yeah, I mean, anything can happen in these crazy times, and we may have such massive economic turmoil or creeping tyranny or anything that anything's possible. As far as what you can do, yeah, you could offer legislation to prevent it. You could certainly vote against it if anybody tries to do it. You have different powers. The filibuster is a great power. I'm actually doing my own filibuster on Monday. I'm gonna talk a long time, starting at 9 a.m. about liberty. I'm just gonna keep talking, and in the Senate you can do that, and as long as you can hold the floor, you can keep talking, and that can actually delay, and in some cases even end up causing legislation to be canceled. And like you mentioned, you can use the pulpit to attract attention, news coverage, and things like that. So you can do what you can do. Senators aren't that powerful really in our system. You're only one of 100, but you do have power, and you can exercise that power, and you're a voice for the people, which is also great, because it means hopefully people who maybe don't agree with everything that I believe in will say, all right, yeah, that's fine. It's not like he's going to break something they like. They might like something. I can't break it single-handedly.
Right, right. You mentioned Rand Paul there, and I think he's kind of famous or infamous, I guess, prior to all of his back and forth with Fossey. He was pretty well known for using that filibuster, and obviously that sounds like something you would be happy to use were you to become a senator as well. Have you thought about what being a senator beyond that could really look like in terms of what you could do? Would you see it more as like using a filibuster basically as either a bully pulpit or just a way to sort of hold legislation, maybe draw attention on yourself and therefore the issue you're trying to talk about? Or have you actually thought like, all right, what kind of legislation could I put together? Like, could I work with a Rand Paul or even like some guys that aren't terrible, like a Mike Lear, for example? I mean, how much thought have you got into of like, what could this actually look like if I found myself in Washington, D.C., oh, God forbid, for 6 years?
Yeah, no, I've thought about it a great deal. I right before I even announced and before I made the final decision, I thought about all aspects of that, including what my life is like, because it's a big sacrifice to leave this beautiful farm and go down to that, spider infested swamp. Right. So that's a big deal. I looked into like, how many days do you physically have to be down there? What do you do? And as far as like the actions, I think a lot of the current system is kind of broken. Politics as usual is kind of broken. So doing things differently. I'm a disruptor. I'd like to figure out how much I can disrupt. One of the first things, probably if I were to be elected, the first thing I would do is meet Rand Paul. And I'd say, I met him a few weeks, month or so ago. I met him a couple years ago. So I've met him a few times, but I'd go in and he knows I'm running and everything, but I'd go in and I'd say, great to have you as a colleague. You're the one I think I'm most aligned with, and you've been here a long time, and you know what you're doing. So please give me some advice. Give me.
Can I tag along?
Yeah. What do you think would be a good way for me to accomplish the things that I care about in liberty? Because he knows a lot of these, and that goes, there's members of Congress and others. Thomas Massey, he's on Congress. I'd look him up right away too. And although he's not in the Senate, he certainly knows the rules, and they may have thoughts. Say, hey, you know what, Bruce, don't bother trying to put this bill forward. That's just going to piss everybody off, and it's never going to go anywhere. Try and do this bill instead, or co-sponsor this with me, or do this thing, or you know what, don't do the filibuster here. That's a wasted opportunity. Do it over here. I would listen to those kind of folks, and I'd probably get a lawyer very quickly, who would give me advice on like, what powers do I have as a senator to disrupt and cause a little bit of trouble and shake up the swamp a little bit. And then there's your standard things, just kind of how you vote and what you do and whether you do, doing a filibuster or something like that. There's quite a few procedural things. There's a lot of different things. You can question people. You can subpoena people for hearings. And it's a big deal. Like you have to go, so that's why they're able to get people like Zuckerberg to show up and get more press, because they just make you. There's a lot of things like that are possible. You also do confirmation hearings for judges and for flag officers in the military. So yeah, there's quite a few things you can do. And I would just every turn, at every opportunity, every way, without compromise, look for ways to, reduce tyranny and increase freedom.
I'm curious, Bruce. I mean, I think the reasons you're running as a Republican are very obvious, because you actually want to win this seat and you want to actually affect some things at the legislative level. but I'm curious that you've been following along. I'm sure you're very well aware of the Mises Caucus takeover of the Libertarian Party. I'm curious how you view that. I guess both on sort of a personal level, what you just think of it in terms of the messaging and that sort of thing, but then where you think that could possibly go politically. Do you think it could get to a point where, maybe the Libertarian Party isn't, not, winning congressional seats left and right or anything like that, but could they become powerful enough or large enough to matter in the sense of, maybe we're the 3% difference in a race, a 2% difference in a race, and now you have to give us a concession of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love those folks. I like the Mises Caucus, and I support. Somehow I've managed to stay out of most of the never-ending drama in the libertarian
and
circle.
Here I am trying to suck you right in.
I don't know. I like everybody, and there's a lot of infighting in libertarian circles, a lot of drama, and I've managed to avoid it. Especially weird that I'm here in New Hampshire where there's a lot of it, maybe more than anywhere, but I like them all. I mean, I like people who care about liberty and freedom, and however they want to do that. Anybody who's out there speaking, I mean, I could be running for dog catcher, and if I'm on your podcast and your listeners are hearing it, we're doing something. Both of us are doing something for liberty, and they're doing something by listening. Hopefully, even if they disagree, they're fine tuning their thoughts or figuring out some point that you or I make that they agree with, or maybe sharing it. We've all got to do this. These ideas are important, and we've got to get them out. And I hope that I'd like to see a stronger libertarian party, a much stronger liberty Republican. I'd like to see the liberty take over the Republicans, and I'd like to see a libertarian Democrat wing come about. And we just, all of us, push everything more towards liberty and freedom. We have to. The pendulum swung way too far the other way. I think and hope that will happen. I really hope it'll happen. I'd love to see libertarian Democrats even just kind of swing the whole pendulum the other way. And it's happened before, and I think it'll happen again. I certainly hope so. And I hope it's not with 30 years of tyranny first.
Well, let's hope not. Yeah, I mean, if we got 30 years of tyranny like the last 2 years, it's gonna be interesting. I guess you could say. Bruce, thank you so much for coming on and batting this stuff around with me. Before I let you go, why don't you just let everybody know where they can find more information about your campaign and how they can support what you're doing?
Yeah, so brucefenton.com. I think right around when this is released, I'll be doing the filibuster July 18th. And my website's brucefenton.com. We'd love to have donations. I hate asking for donations, but it's a reality of politics. So if you can donate, especially if you're some OG crypto person or something, that's appreciated. Support is appreciated. Volunteers, especially if you're in New Hampshire, be sure to vote in the primary and vote in the general. And, get involved, go run for office, go to your school board, support a candidate like me. Maybe you say, I don't feel like supporting. I don't feel like running myself. All right, pretend you're running and just help me instead, donate 10 hours of time, or to some other candidate, somebody in your own state or whatever. But it is important for us to get involved, and because we've got to reverse this tyranny, and we've got to bring freedom back and make our country as good as we can ever make it.
All right. Well, Bruce Fenton, we will certainly have our eye on your campaign, and definitely wish you the best of luck. So keep up the great work. Keep on rolling.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Live long and live free and live free and live free and live free.